We're going to be talking now about communications, just basically the overview about communications. Communication has several different fields, but it's one of the disciplines that is quite often overlooked. A lot of different disciplines make up communications, but when you're talking about management of people, understanding how people communicate and how you communicate to them, all the different concepts of it, of the nonverbal, the active listenings, the framing, all these different parts of it make a big difference in how effective you are as a manager. Now, when you look at communications, a couple of things that we kind of look at is that communications is drawn upon several different disciplines: anthropology, psychology, sociology, business. And, maybe some people would not agree with me about this. Even though communications is a discipline, I think it's actually because it's made up of so many other disciplines that it's not a standalone discipline, like maybe, let's say, a rhetoric is, or anthropology. To me, that's kind of a standalone. But the discipline of communication is very broad, and it can be affected by all these other different things. Now, when you look at communications, there's what we call interpersonal, small groups, organizational, intercultural, international, public and mass communication. So there's different subcategories within it. And it has to consider how people will communicate with individual society and other cultures. And this is the part of it that we're probably the most concerned with. So we're going to look today at the foundations of human communications. Now, this is a nice little graphic. This is what communications is all about. It's about thinking, which is critical thought, about listening, which can be active, strategic, empathetic listening, all these different listenings, speaking. How do you actually speak? Matter of fact, the Communication Association used to be called the Speech Association because people thought that communication was just a matter of speaking. Matter of fact, when I've told people before that my PhD is in communications, they say, oh, then you really know how to speak well. Well, it's a lot more than that, because there's also, like you see here, the nonverbal side of it. So what would be a good definition of communication? So this is one that says a continuous transactional, that's an important word, process involving participants who occupy different but overlapping environments, and they create relationships through exchange of messages, many of which are affected by external, physiological, and psychological noise. Now I want to stop there just for a second. Let's talk about what is a physiological and a psychological noise. A physiological noise would be maybe the ambulance or the fire engine going behind us. So maybe you and I are having a nice little conversation. Here comes a fire engine, and that becomes a physiological noise, something that actually is going to take us away from listening to each other. Matter of fact, I'm going to go one step further and say that is an external noise because we have no control over that. Physiological, maybe you do have a certain amount of control over it. And let's say, have you ever talked to someone who has hiccups? You're talking to them, and that hiccups, that could be a case of a physiological noise that you don't have any say over. The next one is the psychological noise. And this is kind of, you're thinking things in your mind. Someone's talking to you and you're thinking about, well, what am I going to eat tonight? Or, what am I going to do this weekend? So your mind is wondering, is doing other things instead of listening or communicating. Now, principles of communications. First of all, the communication is circular. I like to say because it goes round and round and round. And you put it out, it comes back to you. And also is irreversible. I don't agree totally with it being unrepeatable, but words can certainly cause a certain amount of pain, and they can be a source of joy at the same time. So it can be repeatable, but the irreversible side means that basically once you say it, you can't take it back. I remember the days where, if you're as old as I am, you would remember the TV show called Perry Mason. Now, he was a defense attorney. He always was trying to get the person away from being accused of the crime. He had a very nice way in the courtroom, and this goes back in the 60s and 70s. He had a very nice way in the courtroom of asking the accuser who's accusing his client some questions, and the prosecuting attorney would say, I object. and the judge would go there and say objection sustained. Now that means that he agrees with the objection compared to overruled. So he agreed with the objection. So you would say, counselor talking to Perry Mason, the division, he says, you have to change your question. Then the judge turns to the court reporter who's writing things down and says, strike that from the records. Then he would turn to the jury and ask the jury, says, I'd like for you to not pay attention, ignore what you just heard the witness say. Of course, if you're like I am, when someone tells me, oh, just don't listen to what I'm saying, or just ignore what I said, that's when actually you pay closer attention. That's when you kind of pump up and listen. So that's the problem with communication. It is irreversible once you're saying it. People do remember things, and you cannot pull it back. Now, there are some different components of communication. So first one is encoding. Second one is decoding. The third one is called the channel. Fourth one is called the message, and then the fifth one is noise. So let's kind of look at these individually. Encoding means that I, as the communicator, has to take a message and encode it. So let's say, for example, I'm going to say to you, Zeigen Sie bitte Ihr Ausweispapier. You're saying, what did he say? I'll say it again to you. Zeigen Sie bitte Ihr Ausweispapier. Now what I did is I took a message, I encoded that message, and I sent it out to you. The problem is, the way I encoded it, you couldn't understand it unless you speak German. Because I just said to you, may I see your travel documents? But if I had encoded it by saying, may I see your travel documents? You would have understood it. So you as the receiver could decode the message. So part of it is the decoding is based upon your memories. And we talk about more of this when we're talking about active listening, but it's you have got memories in your thalamus that is going to have different things like words that you understand, and then anything that you don't understand, you can't really decode. So apparently you cannot decode the German unless you happen to speak German. So encoding is taking the thought, putting it into a message, hopefully that the other person can understand, and then the receiver decodes it. The channel is the way we do this. We could do it through, you see, it says sight, sound, touch, taste, smell. I just use sound. But maybe I could have done something with smell. Maybe I could go out there and had a fragrance of lemon, something that, or maybe rose. That's also a channel that people can use. And then I did it actually in a verbal compared to a nonverbal message. And then the noise, in this case, it could be a literal noise, a fire engine going by, or it could be a psychological noise. Okay, so what does communication look like? Well, first of all, communication has three different components. It could be an action, which is a message transfer, or it could be an interaction, which is an exchange, or it could be a transaction, which is a message is created. So let's go through each one of these very quickly. The first one is the action. And the action is a message transfer. And that's exactly what I'm doing right now. I am speaking to you. You're not speaking back to me at all. So it's like a monologue. It's a speech. So a action communication model means one person is giving the message and is going out and is staying there, is not coming back. Now then you have what's called the transaction. The transaction is where you are literally going to try to create some type of a message, and that's where when I say something to you, then you maybe respond back. So let's say I could say to you, hey, let's go get something to eat. Where would you like to go? And you may say, let's go to get a hamburger, or let's go get Chick-fil-A. That would be a transaction. But then you have what's called the interaction, and this is what we consider a message exchange. So not only do we create a message, now we're exchanging it. So when I say, hey, let's go get something to eat, you say, yeah, let's go get a hamburger. I say, what type of hamburger? Where you want to go? You say, let's go to Burger King. I said, no, I think I'd rather go to McDonald's, get a hamburger. You say, oh, no, I ate a McDonald's last week. Okay, now that is what we call message exchange, because we are going with the interaction. Is circular, is going back and forth, and we're having a nice little conversation. And there's our little circular pattern. Now, the question is, can you not communicate? For sometimes people used to sit there and say you could not communicate. Other people say, no, you cannot not communicate. And what that basically means, and this is the old thing about if a tree falls in the forest, Does anyone actually hear the tree? Of course, the tree makes noise in the forest, but you cannot not communicate. And people used to assume that, that you had to do something verbally to communicate. Well, no, remember nonverbal. Nonverbal is saying nothing, but if I'm nodding my head up and down, that means yes. Or nodding back and forth, that can mean a no. Or remember I told you about a smell. Maybe my cologne I'm using puts out a musk fragrance. So even though I'm not saying anything, even though I'm not moving my head or anything, now I'm communicating with a aroma in it. So yes, there's no way a person can not communicate. Now there's several different focus areas in communications. There's intrapersonal, which is communicating with yourself, believe it or not, is when you're talking to yourself, having your conversation. That's not weird. That's what we do, okay? We will have communications. Did I study enough for my exam? I didn't think the McDonald's burger was as good as it should have been. Some people actually will speak out loud. That's okay too. But then you have interpersonal, and that's a study of communications that is between people. It's between a pair of people, okay? Then you have group and team communication. So this is a study of communications where you have more than maybe one person. You can have 3 people on up that you have a communication with. Now, there are several communication characteristics. First of all, we know is inescapable. Communication is going to happen. So that goes back to that, can you not communicate? Just standing there, you're communicating. Crossing your arms, that's a nonverbal. Remember I told you about maybe wearing a fragrance or a cologne. That's going to be a form of communication. So all those things are in there. And communication, like I said, is irreversible. It's complicated. And you've already seen that is because there's so many different components of communications. And when you start throwing culture into it, about how one ethnic culture or one international culture communicates compared to another, it gets very, very complicated. It's also content and relationship driven. The reason why I'm communicating to you now is I'm trying to give you content. And if, for example, you're listening to me, you have some type of relationship because I am the instructor, the professor, whatever, and you're the student or you're the listener to it. And then last of all, communication is governed by rules. And basically, like I said before, is that there's certain things that make communications where it is and is not. And, just sitting there throwing something against the wall is not a form of communications. It may be a form of a nonverbal communication, but it would not be an interpersonal communication, or it would not be an intrapersonal, or it may not be a group communication. So there are rules that govern communications. Let's talk real briefly about the interpersonal communication. So interpersonal versus impersonal. What's the difference? Interpersonal is where you're actually talking to somebody. Impersonal would be typing something on the keyboard. Impersonal could be a text. It could be an email, but that still is communications because communication is not just verbal or nonverbal, it is also written. And like you saw before, it is also listening, and it's also a form of trying to get a message to somebody. So impersonal would be an email or maybe a text. Group communications, basically it's a dyad when you got 2 people talking. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. I'm so sorry. Under group communications, you have a dyad compared to interpersonal. That's 2 people. And then you have a small group, which is at least 3 people. And then you have a team. And a team would be the organization of a larger group that's probably more than 3 people. Now, let's focus on some specific areas of communication studies. First one is organizational. So this is a study of understanding the identity and the codes of thought and actions that are shared by members of an organization. And so it's kind of the way they talk, the way they act, those nonverbals. And the first thing I want to show you here is take a look at a picture of this. This is a picture of some people who new hires at Chase, JP Morgan. And you look at them, and I can guarantee you the way they talk is to be a certain way because they're going to use a proper type of speech. They're probably not going to use a bunch of slang because I'm sure Chase, JP Morgan, just like Bank of America, Wells Fargo, they tell people is that, we have to act professional and you have to dress professional. The way they dress is also a form of communication. So nonverbal in there. And they're clean cut. You don't see scraggly beards or anything like that. And so this is a form of organizational communication because the organization told them how to communicate. Now look at Google. Google communicates a little bit differently. They're still an organization, but look at the way they're dressed. That's communicating something to you. Big difference between that and that, right? They're clean cut, but here we got someone with a little bit longer beard compared to the short beard. So here's a case where, Google says, we have a different style of those nonverbal communications. And I imagine the way they talk is a lot more relaxed, a lot more casual. Now, one of the things I always love to talk about is a little bit about airlines because you can really, really, really see different types of organizational communications. This is Southwest Airlines. A couple things right off the bat. Look at the way they're dressed. Very casual. It's a fun airline. And you can just look at them. They're happy. Of course, everyone's happy. They're going on trips. Even look at their logo. Their logo is the heart with the wings on it. But now, this is British Airways. Look at the way that they are dressed. Now they're happy too. They're smiling. Big difference between the shorts, the polo tops, the khakis, compared to, the suit, the colors, everything's going to be navy blue, and the women wearing a hat. Now, let me tell you something about British Air, about organizational communication. British Air, if you ever want to, you could actually go and watch some of this on YouTube. But see, what British Air does is they make a statement. For Southwest, they're just, it's the way they're dressed, they're talking, they're nicely, they're joking around with the passengers. British Air is very, very conservative. And what they do is that when they go to the airplane in a terminal, and this has happened, I've seen this countless times. I've seen it in my own city of Austin. I've seen it in Houston, Dallas, New York, Boston, every place else. They're flying, first of all, large airplanes. They're going to be flying a 747, which I think now they've gotten rid of. They're going to be flying these large Airbuses. So it's going to take probably about 20 people to fly that between the three cabin crew, or the cockpit crew, cabin crew. And then you got all these flight attendants there. Then you can see they're all dressed very similar. They all wear their hats. And the man here, he's a steward. He's probably the head flight attendant. He's probably the head steward. He's dressed very stately too. Now, the shoes, remarkably, what they've done is on the heels of the women's shoes, the leather is not there anymore. I'm sorry, take it back. The rubber's not there. And on the men's shoe, the rubber's not there either. On the pilot it is, but talking about the people or the flight attendants. And what happens, first of all, in airline terminals, airport terminals are always some type of hard floor, marble or tile or something like that there. So when they're walking, it sounds like a stampede. And they're walking together, they're making lots of noise, and everybody turns around. Everybody turns around to see what's happening. And here you hear them coming, toom, 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 toom. As they're coming, it's getting louder and louder. As they walk by, everybody stops what they're doing, and they turn and they look, and they see this group of 20 of these very stately dressed people going by. And then as they go by, then start talking again. That is organizational communications, because what they've done is they've used communications to try to signify and to represent their organizational culture, which is we're very stately, we're very conservative, and we're going to take care of things. Nothing gets by us. And you can even see that here. Look at their logo. Look at their logo of, looks like a seal compared to Southwest Airlines with their fun logo. And of course, if the Southwest Airlines flight attendants were walking down the terminal, you wouldn't hear them because they're all wearing tennis shoes, and so you wouldn't hear them. So I always enjoy talking about that. Now let's talk a little bit more. That was organizational communications. And then you've got what's called intercultural, cross-cultural communications. This is a study of communication that involves different cultural backgrounds, including the study of similarities and differences across culture. The best way I can explain this to you is when I was in Bulgaria some years back, we were getting ready to go on a tour, and the tour guide across the street from us was motioning for us to come. But when you want someone to come, you're taking your hand, you're putting it out, and you bring it to you out. This come to me, come to me. But when you want someone to go away, you take your hand, you push them. Go away, go away. Bulgaria, this tour guide, she was taking her hand and she was doing the go away, go away. I'm kind of like, what are you trying to tell me? And I look at her and I take my hand and say, come here, I'm moving. And she was like, no, 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 no. And she'll push go away, go away. I was completely confused. And finally she comes across the street. And we start talking. She said, oh, you Americans. Oh, Americans, I'm sorry. She said, in Bulgaria, when we push away, that means to come to us. And when we take our hand to move toward us, that means go away from us. I'm kind of like, that is the craziest thing I've ever heard in my life. But when she started explaining to me, you've got to almost do this as I'm telling you this. You put your hand out, put it flat, and then think about that you've got something in your hand you want to get rid of. So you're going to throw it over your shoulder, okay? You're going to get rid of it. You're going to throw it over your shoulder. But think about if there's something in front of you like a pen, and you want that pen. What are you going to do? You're going to reach down, pick it up, and pull it back. Reach down, pick it up, then pull it back to you. That's the way their culture is. So for them to come to you means reaching out, pulling the person toward them, pull it back toward them. If you don't want them, you take your hand, you're going to get away, go away. I'm throwing you over my shoulder. Kind of opposite, but that's a nonverbal, and that's a situation with a cultural nonverbal is completely different. Then you get into things like words that are different, because verbal is very, very important. And some of the words that we use are completely different from other words. So for example, in the British, here's some of my favorite ones. We may use cell phones, but they'll call it a mobile phone. And of course, we refer to a vacuum cleaner. They refer to it as a Hoover. I've never heard of that one before. I thought Hoover made vacuum cleaners. And then, of course, there's some other fun ones in here. I took some kids over to England. I've done it several times. I remember one of them wanted to go and buy some tennis shoes. And so they went in and said, do you have any tennis shoes? And they're kind of like, what? Tennis shoes, tennis shoes. And then I said, sneakers. And they still, sneakers? Well, look what they use. They use the word trainers. Now, over in the U.S., if someone says, I want trainers or training shoes, I would probably think you're buying them for your toddler to learn how to walk or something. So I think that's kind of interesting. And, of course, look at some of these other items like flashlights, a torch. People say, do you have a torch? No, I'm sorry. Those torches went out in the 15th century. And they're going, no, torch. Oh, yeah, the flashlight. And, of course, some of the other ones, we turn on the faucet, they turn on the tap, we throw things into the trash can, they throw things in the bin. That is it for today. That is the end of this part one about communications. And I hope you listen to some of the other sections I have where I talk about active listening. Now I talk about nonverbal. And I appreciate you and hope you learned something that's going to help you.